What I am concerned about is the Washington war machine doing what
you say that's Lindsey Graham.
I take that as Senator Graham, the senior senator from South Carolina. I take that as the military-industrial complex. I take that as a guy that is going back to my home state of South Carolina, telling mothers and fathers to send their children into war to take an island over oil. And I am vehemently opposed to that.
I want to play, so everyone's on the same page, hearing what you're talking about in reference to Senator Lindsey Graham, what he had to say. Let me play that.
So here's what I tell President Trump. Keep it up for a few more weeks. Take Carg Island, where all of the resources they have to produce oil. Control that island. Let this regime die on a vine. We got 2 Marine expeditionary units sailing to this island. We did Iwo Jima. We can do this.
Let me annotate 3 specific elements from that clip before we proceed, because each one carries analytical weight that the framing in the source material does not fully develop. First, the Lindsey Graham clip at the opening. Graham's statement, specifically his call to take a resource-rich island using Marine expeditionary units, is relevant not as political theater, but as documented evidence of the congressional foreign policy environment in which this administration is operating. The war powers constraints documented in Episode 5 are not abstract. They are responses to a specific documented posture of military adventurism that members of Congress from both parties have flagged as operating outside constitutional limits. Graham's statement, placed in that context, is a data point in the documented pattern of executive military authority being asserted in ways that the constitutional framework does not clearly support. Second, Nancy Mace's letter. The source characterizes this as the partisan shield cracking, which is dramatically accurate but analytically imprecise. Let me give you the precise version. Nancy Mace is a Republican representative from South Carolina. Her documented political profile is one of consistent MAGA alignment. She built her congressional identity on loyalty to Trump and conservative credentials. When a member with that documented profile produces an official congressional letter stating that the Attorney General handled the Epstein files terribly and undermined Trump, the analytical significance is not primarily that it cracks the shield. The analytical significance is what it does to the evidentiary landscape. Democratic accusations against Trump administration officials can be categorized, dismissed, or neutralized as partisan. That characterization is available as a defense mechanism because it rests on a factually accurate description of the source. The criticism is coming from political opponents. When the identical substantive criticism appears in an official document produced by a Republican member, someone whose documented political profile eliminates the partisan source defense, it cannot be categorized as partisan. It is, by definition, a bipartisan documented finding. That is a different evidentiary category, and different evidentiary categories have different weight in formal institutional proceedings. Third, the DOJ's position. The Department of Justice argued that because Bondi was subpoenaed in her official capacity as Attorney General, the subpoena no longer applies now that she has left the position. That argument has a legal surface logic. Official capacity subpoenas are traditionally understood to attach to the role. But the committee's documented response eliminated the argument at the source. The subpoena was issued to Pamela Jo Bondi by name, not to the office. The DOJ's argument addresses a category of subpoena that this particular subpoena does not belong to. That is a significant documented legal distinction, and I want to spend the next section building it out in full.
New tonight, the Justice Department said that Pam Bondi won't testify in the Jeffrey Epstein probe since she's no longer serving as Attorney General. Bondi was scheduled to appear for a deposition on April 14th before the House Oversight Committee to discuss her handling of the Epstein files. The DOJ says that since Bondi was subpoenaed in her official role as then Attorney General, the subpoena no longer applies. It's now asking that the subpoena be withdrawn. A spokesperson for the Republican-led House panel says it will contact Bondi about next steps.
The committee spokesperson's statement, "We did it by name and not by the title of the Attorney General," is the most analytically significant sentence in this entire episode. It is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a precise legal statement about the category of subpoena that was issued, and its precision is deliberate. The committee anticipated the DOJ's official capacity argument and closed it in advance by ensuring the subpoena was drafted as a personal instrument rather than an official one. That is not reactive legal work. That is proactive institutional design. The committee voted on this subpoena weeks before Bondi was fired. They issued it by name. They anticipated the departure scenario, and they built the subpoena in a way that the departure scenario could not dissolve. The analytical significance of that sequence, vote, name-specific drafting, firing, enforcement, is that it demonstrates the committee understood both the legal architecture and the political dynamics it was navigating. This is not a committee that stumbled into accountability. It is a committee that planned for it. Now let me turn to the full analysis of what the Mace letter means institutionally and why the bipartisan structure of this accountability moment is more significant than either its emotional framing or its immediate political implications suggest. The Mace letter, what it does to the evidentiary landscape, Nancy Mace's official congressional letter documenting that Bondi handled the Epstein files terribly and undermined Trump, requires careful analytical treatment because its significance operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Level 1, the content of the finding. The letter documents two specific findings. First, that Bondi handled the Epstein files terribly, a formal assessment of the quality and integrity of her conduct as Attorney General in discharging a specific statutory responsibility. Second, that she undermined Trump, a formal assessment of the political and institutional consequences of her conduct for the president she served. Both findings are significant. The first because it is a documented Republican assessment of conduct that forms the specific subject matter of the congressional investigation. The second because it creates a direct documented contradiction with Trump's own public assessment of Bondi's performance. Level 2, the evidentiary category shift. This is the analytically most important level, and it is where most coverage stops short of full precision. In any political controversy involving an administration official, the evidentiary landscape has two distinct categories of documentation: partisan and bipartisan. Partisan documentation, accusations from the opposing party, critical reporting from outlets perceived as oppositional, protest statements from advocacy organizations can be neutralized as politically motivated. The neutralization argument does not require engaging with the substance of the criticism. It requires only characterizing the source as adversarial. Bipartisan documentation cannot be neutralized through source characterization. When the substance of the criticism is identical to the partisan criticism, but the source is a documented ally, someone whose political profile eliminates the partisan motivation defense, the only available response is to engage the substance. And engaging the substance in this case means either defending the specific conduct under examination or conceding the finding. Mace's letter converts the Bondi-Epstein files criticism from the partisan evidentiary category to the bipartisan evidentiary category. That conversion has permanent effects on every subsequent proceeding that examines the same conduct. A congressional investigation cannot be dismissed as a partisan witch hunt when the documentary record it cites includes Republican-sourced findings. A future impeachment article on obstruction of justice cannot be characterized as one-party political theater when the evidentiary record supporting it includes a Republican representative's formal documented assessment of the same conduct. The letter is permanent. It is in the congressional record. It cannot be retracted or qualified out of existence by subsequent political developments. Whatever Mace says or does in the future, the documented finding, Bondi handled the Epstein files terribly and undermined Trump, is part of the permanent institutional record of this Congress. Level 3, what the intra-party source reveals about the broader Republican calculus. Mace's documented decision to produce this letter reflects a specific political calculation that the reputational and electoral benefit of being publicly associated with Epstein file accountability outweighs the reputational and electoral cost of openly criticizing a Trump appointee in an official document. That calculation is a documented data point in the analysis of intra-party Republican dynamics. When a member with a documented MAGA loyalty profile makes that calculation publicly and formally, it signals that the same calculation is being made privately by members who have not yet produced public documentation of it. The private calculation precedes the public documentation. Mace's letter is visible. The private calculations that are consistent with it but have not yet surfaced in public documents are, by definition, invisible.
Former Attorney General Pam Bondi was supposed to appear before the House Oversight Committee next week, but the Justice Department now says she will not. The department argues that because Bondi was subpoenaed in her official capacity as Attorney General, the subpoena no longer applies. President Trump fired Bondi last week. Lawmakers on both sides say they still expect her to sit for the deposition. Republican Nancy Mace says Bondi cannot escape accountability by leaving office. Democrat Robert Garcia says he will push for contempt charges if she refuses to appear. The fight centers on Bondi's role in releasing the so-called Epstein files, which lawmakers say contained multiple errors and missed a release deadline set by Congress. The committee is also pressing ahead with other witnesses. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates is set for a closed-door interview on June 10th. Gates has denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes and says he's willing to cooperate. He has called his meetings and dealings with Epstein a huge mistake.
But their existence is the inference that the documented behavior supports. This is precisely the dynamic I identified in episodes 3 and 5 as the third Nixon factor. Partisan leadership withdrawal. Mace's letter is not yet the equivalent of Goldwater, Scott, and Rhodes walking into the White House, but it is a documented instance of the type of intra-party accountability signal that, when it accumulates across sufficient members at sufficient seniority, produces that moment. The Trump-Bondi contradiction, a documented credibility problem. The source material identifies this contradiction, and I want to give it the precise analytical treatment it deserves, rather than the dramatic framing the source applies. Trump's documented public assessment of Bondi's congressional performance, fantastic versus the radical left, his own words, is permanently in the public record. Mace's documented formal assessment, handled the Epstein files terribly and undermined Trump, is permanently in the congressional record. These two assessments cannot both be accurate. Either Bondi's handling of the Epstein files was fantastic or it was terrible. Either her conduct served the president's interests or it undermined him. The assessments are mutually exclusive on both dimensions. When two documented assessments from within the same political coalition are mutually exclusive on material factual questions, the resulting credibility problem is structural rather than reputational. It is not primarily about which individual appears more credible. It is about the documented fact that the coalition has produced two irreconcilable formal assessments of the same conduct, and that irreconcilability is now in the permanent record of both the presidency and the Congress. Every future proceeding that examines Bondi's conduct at the DOJ will have access to both documents. The deposition, if it occurs, will produce testimony that either aligns with one document or the other, or contradicts both. Any of those outcomes produces additional documented evidence for the formal record. The president cannot resolve the contradiction through social media activity. The contradiction exists in formal documents. Resolving it requires engaging the institutional processes, the deposition, the committee investigation, the congressional record that created it. The Epstein file subject matter, why this particular investigation resists deflection. I want to address a structural characteristic of the Epstein file's subject matter that makes the accountability dynamics around this investigation different from other congressional inquiries. Most congressional investigations into executive branch conduct involve policy decisions or institutional practices that, however important, are abstract enough that sustained public attention is difficult to maintain. The interested parties are engaged. The general public is periodically engaged. The investigative process moves slowly enough that each individual development generates limited new attention. The Epstein files investigation has a different structural characteristic. The subject matter generates sustained public attention across the full political spectrum. Questions about who was protected in the Epstein case, why certain names appeared in released files while others were redacted, and whether the release process served the interests of victims or co-conspirators, these questions engage fundamental intuitions about equal accountability that exist independent of partisan affiliation. The documented finding that the release contained errors and missed a statutory deadline is a specific, verifiable institutional failure. The allegation that the release protected certain individuals while exposing others is a specific, testable, factual claim. Both categories are the kind of concrete, verifiable question that congressional oversight investigations are designed to examine. And both are the kind of concrete, verifiable question that sustained public attention makes politically costly to deflect. Every hearing, every deposition transcript, every document release in this investigation generates renewed public attention to questions that a broad audience across party lines has documented interest in answering. That dynamic is a structural feature of the subject matter, not a product of political spin from either side. The institutional precedent, what this establishes beyond the immediate case. I want to close this analytical section by stepping back from the specific facts of the Bondi situation and examining what it establishes institutionally, because the institutional precedent has implications beyond this particular controversy. The documented outcome as of this recording is the following. A congressional committee issued a subpoena to a serving administration official. The official was subsequently fired by the president. The DOJ argued the firing dissolved the subpoena obligation. The committee documented that the subpoena was personal, not official, and that the firing changed nothing. Bipartisan contempt enforcement was committed to formally by members of both parties. That sequence establishes, in documented form, a congressional institutional position. The act of leaving government service, whether voluntarily or by termination, does not dissolve personal legal obligations arising from official conduct. The accountability follows the person. This precedent constrains the exit strategy of every future administration official across every administration. The calculation that I can resign and the subpoena becomes moot is a calculation that this committee has formally and documentably rejected, and the personal vs. official subpoena distinction, now documented in the congressional record with bipartisan support, is available as precedent in every subsequent oversight proceeding. That is a significant institutional development, not because of its immediate political consequences, which are real but limited in scope, because of its long-term effect on the accountability calculus for executive branch officials who understand that their exposure to congressional oversight does not terminate with their employment. The midterm implications, adding the documented variable to the November 2026 framework. In Episode 5, I identified November 2026 as the structural decision point for the congressional accountability track. The Bondi Mace Epstein developments add a specific documented variable to that framework. The Mace letter is now in the permanent congressional record. Every Republican candidate for Congress in 2026 will face the question of whether they agree with Mace's documented assessment. Democratic challengers have a Republican source document characterizing the Trump Attorney General's conduct as terrible and damaging to the president. That document cannot be characterized as a Democratic talking point. It is a Republican formal finding. The midterm electoral dynamic this creates is specific. Republican incumbents in competitive districts must either align with Mace's documented assessment, defend Bondi's conduct against a Republican colleague's formal criticism, or attempt to avoid the question, each of which carries documented political costs in different constituency segments. The intra-party accountability signal from Mace does not, by itself, change the congressional mathematics I laid out in Episode 5. The Senate conviction threshold remains 67 votes. The House impeachment threshold remains 218 votes. What it does is add a documented evidentiary element to the midterm environment that makes the electoral terrain less favorable for incumbents who have maintained uncritical alignment with this administration. That is a real and documentable effect. It is incremental. It is not terminal in the structural sense I described in episode 3, but it moves in the direction of the threshold that matters, and it does so through a mechanism, formal intra-party accountability documentation, that is more durable than polling data or media coverage. Let me bring this to a close with the same analytical discipline I have applied across every episode in this series. The documented institutional record from this episode establishes the following. 1. The House Oversight Committee issued a subpoena to Pam Bondi personally, not in her official capacity as Attorney General. The documented legal consequence is that her departure from office, whether voluntary or by termination, does not dissolve her legal obligation to appear. The subpoena follows the person, not the position. That is a documented institutional precedent with implications for every future executive branch official across every future administration. 2. The DOJ argued that the official capacity subpoena no longer applies because Bondi left office. The committee documented, through its spokesperson's on-record statement, that the argument addresses a legal category the subpoena does not belong to. The subpoena was issued by name. The DOJ's argument fails on its own terms when applied to the specific document at issue. 3. Republican Representative Nancy Mace produced an official congressional letter documenting that Bondi handled the Epstein files terribly and undermined Trump. That letter is in the permanent congressional record. It converts the Bondi accountability question from the partisan evidentiary category to the bipartisan evidentiary category, a conversion with permanent consequences for every subsequent proceeding that examines the same conduct. 4. The letter creates a documented, irreconcilable contradiction between Trump's public assessment of Bondi's performance, fantastic, and Mace's formal documented assessment. Both are in the permanent record. Both cannot be accurate. The deposition, when it occurs, will produce testimony that either resolves or deepens that contradiction, and either outcome produces additional documented evidence. 5. The bipartisan commitment to contempt enforcement, Garcia from the Democratic side, Mace from the Republican side, makes the standard partisan deflection defense unavailable for any attempt to prevent Bondi from testifying. Contempt proceedings supported by both parties are harder to characterize as politically motivated and substantially more durable institutionally. 6. The Epstein files investigation connects directly to the obstruction of justice article in House Resolution 353, to the documented pattern of using the DOJ as a personal protection mechanism, and to the broader accountability architecture I have been documenting across this series. It is not an isolated controversy. It is one node in a documented network of institutional accountability that has been building across multiple jurisdictions, multiple cases, and multiple institutional actors. I want to close with a specific observation about the framing this type of story typically receives, because I think it is worth stating directly. The source material I work from to produce these episodes tends toward dramatic language, Shakespearean tragedy, genuinely terrifying, 11 words that changed everything. That language is not dishonest in the sense that it reflects a genuine assessment of the situation's gravity, but it is analytically imprecise in a way that I think actually understates the significance of what is documented. The documented facts of this episode do not require dramatic framing to be serious. A congressional committee issued a personal subpoena, anticipated the departure defense, closed it in advance, received bipartisan enforcement commitment, and documented the first formal Republican-sourced finding of specific conduct failures by this Attorney General, all of it in official documents, all of it in the permanent record, all of it durable against the standard narrative deflections. Those documented facts are serious on their own terms. They do not become more serious when described as terrifying. They become more actionable, more precise, and more analytically useful when described accurately. That is what this channel is for. This is Matthew John Turner. The question I am leaving you with today is specific and documentable. The subpoena issued to Bondi by name rather than by title is now a documented congressional precedent. Go look at how previous congressional subpoenas to executive branch officials were drafted, Compare the language, identify the cases where the personal versus official distinction was litigated, and ask yourself what it means institutionally that a committee anticipated the departure defense and closed it in advance through deliberate drafting choices, because that deliberateness is the most analytically significant element in this entire episode. It means the committee understood the legal architecture, anticipated the countermove, and built the accountability instrument to survive it. That is institutional design, and institutional design is what actually determines whether accountability is durable or temporary. Read the subpoena, read the Mace letter. Both are in the public record. Both are in the permanent congressional record. Both will be cited in every subsequent proceeding that examines this conduct. I will see you in the next one.